Little Red Riding Hood was a sweet little girl. She loved her grandmother very much. One day, her mother baked a delicious cake and asked Little Red Riding Hood to take it to her grandmother's house. Little Red Riding Hood's mother said, "Stay on the path and don't talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood promised she would be careful. She put on her red hood and set off on her journey. The forest path was long and winding, but Little Red Riding Hood wasn't scared. She skipped along, humming a happy tune. Deep inside the forest, a sly wolf was hiding behind a tree. He saw Little Red Riding Hood and licked his lips. He thought she would make a tasty snack, but first he had to trick her. The wolf stepped out onto the path and said in a gruff voice, "Well, hello there, little girl. Where are you going all by yourself?" Little Red Riding Hood wasn't afraid of the wolf. After all, her mother had only warned her about strangers. She politely replied, "I'm going to see my grandmother. She's sick and I'm bringing her this cake." The wolf learned everything he needed to know. He told Little Red Riding Hood to pick some wildflowers for her grandmother. He said, "Go on, take your time. The prettiest flowers are off the path." As soon as Little Red Riding Hood wandered away, the wolf ran towards grandmother's house. He knocked on the door and in a high-pitched voice he said, "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood. Granny, I brought you some cake." The grandmother, who was old and couldn't see very well, thought it was Little Red Riding Hood. She opened the door and the wolf gobbled her up in one gulp. Section 4. A Frightening Discovery. Meanwhile, Little Red Riding Hood had gathered a beautiful bouquet of wildflowers. She smiled, thinking how much her grandmother would love them. She skipped back to the path and continued on her way. When she reached grandmother's house, she thought something was strange. The door was already open. Little Red Riding Hood went inside and saw the wolf lying in bed, wearing her grandmother's nightgown. The wolf said in a croaky voice, "My, what big eyes you have, Little Red Riding Hood." Little Red Riding Hood was confused. She said, "Grandmother, your voice sounds funny. And why are your eyes so big?" Section 5. A Happy Ending and a Lesson Learned. Just then, a woodsman who was chopping wood nearby heard the commotion. He peeked in through the window and saw the wolf in bed. He knew instantly what had happened. The woodsman burst through the door and shouted, "Get out of there, you wicked wolf!" The wolf was so startled that he jumped out of bed and ran away as fast as he could. The woodsman used his axe to cut open the wolf's belly. Out popped grandmother, safe and sound. Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson that day. She realized that it was important to listen to her mother and never talk to strangers. She promised herself that she would always be careful and stay on the path. And so, Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother lived happily ever after.